Um, I've been on this survival kick for a while, right? Well, actually, most of my life. Um, Knowing that I'm not going to be able to keep and maintain a job unless somebody is really understanding. Also, that I'm not going to get paid as much as most other people are. I'm pretty well stuck at entry level positions my entire life. Um, I grew up poor. I grew up learning how to different tricks of all sorts of trades, how to make it work for right fucking now. Um, there's some stuff that is pretty cool that Hollywood has done. Mostly that's not the pedophile producers, it's nerds like me. I'm not so good with the electronics part. I got my friend Rafe, he is. Um, I would be better at putting together and designing a exoskeleton. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make an exoskeleton because he's got MS. And I remembered that during the 80s, and sorry, I got a booger on my nose. During the 1980s, there was a movie about a special effects guy, and he uh, just does stuff for movies. And then, basically he's asked by like the CIA or something to help to pretend to assassinate somebody with Hollywood stuff. And I remember there was a clown in it. And the thing about this clown was this guy put on this suit, and then this clown suit, he turned it on, and whatever he moved with his body, the clown suit moved. Now, it kind of did it a little clunky dunk by comparison. And today we have a lot better technology. The biggest problem with it back then, and even the biggest problem with it that it would have today, is um, batteries. As soon as you start putting batteries in, you start adding weight. Wraith had an idea of having a computer system that's set up to an exoskeleton. And basically, the computer system, all it's supposed to do is be able to tell your movements and relay that to a computer, and it'll basically mimic your movements with the exoskeleton. Um, Something that I had thought of is possibly something that's pneumatic in nature. If you figure that you walk a lot and your body weight is, well, let's go for mine. I haven't weighed myself in a while. I was around 155 last time I was weighed. So I could be anywhere between 140 and 165 right now. Um, my weight does fluctuate quite a bit, especially depending on the season. But let's say we have an air cushion underneath you. You got one for each foot. Um, what you've got there is the ability to, a lot like those flashlights that you shake and stuff, you're able to use your movement and your energy to keep the system going. Since you've got an exoskeleton, you can use a tubing system. Like, let's say you don't need a whole lot of help. You can use a tubing system that is run entirely pneumatically, and the power from it just comes from your body movement. Um, One thing that me and Wraith were talking about was that, if you have something like that, it might make you look pretty big and imposing and intimidating. But he was saying that if you could just get it a little bit of distance in between your body and the exoskeleton, then you can use that little bit of distance to, as you move your body, you move on pressure plates that are in it. And if you push on the pressure plate, then it'll be a more instant release. It'll give you a little bit more oomph to it. You'll be able to carry more. Um, One of the things with Wraith, his big thing was that when he got MS, he couldn't go hiking and camping anymore. He was pretty well stuck to the humdrum stuff that was around Boulder. For him, he wanted to go, climbing up the side of the waterfalls, and just the insanity of youth, right? Well, now he's getting older, and it's been his dream for about 10 years or more to make this exoskeleton. He's spent so many hours trying to build computers, and he's always complaining. I just have to wait just a couple more months, and they're going to have the technology, to power all of this stuff. Just a couple more months, just a couple more months, and he went into it to a lot of the video games that they have out now. They learn how a human body actually moves, and then there's a lot of um, like you guys saw this new police robot thing that you can try to kick it over, it's not going to fall over. And when it kind of runs like a person now, or it kind of runs like a dog now. And it took a lot of doing to be able to do that. So he's been trying to study that kind of stuff and put it in there, and he really has put a lot of thought into it. One thing that I had thought of is possibly using a nylon suit, or even a wetsuit, something of that nature, something that has a little bit of give to it. And basically, the exoskeleton, you would be suspended from it. Um, but when we're talking about doing that, you also have to keep the weight down. He was thinking titanium, but then he found out that titanium isn't quite as strong as people think it is. Um, and a lot of people who have titanium legs will tell you their titanium legs are pretty tough. But those things are thick, and when they go, they go. They don't take as much punishment as steel does. But a lot of the stuff that we had that was fantasy when I was younger, or fantasy far before I was ever born, it's come to fruition. Like, there were people planning on flying to the moon back during more than one Chinese dynasty. And before I was even born, that was achieved. How about powered flight? Same thing before I was born. Hot air balloons, zeppelins, airplanes, even jet craft, years before I was born. They created a functional ion engine in my lifetime. Turns out they're pretty much crap. But a lot of these prepper guys, they all have their own ideas about it. And most of them are men. And depending on their background, the way that they grew up, and the way that they have actually, for many of them, had to use these skills in real life, their experiences are valid. Every one of them, even the soldiers, even if you are against killing and against carrying a gun, and you are entirely interested in the medical part of it, then there is still a lot of field medics that you can learn from. For the medical community to get together with Hollywood, or the robotics community that's making, a lot of these robots are designed for their defense projects for the military. The robots that they have that are basically, they run like dogs or whatever, that's a military project to begin with. It started with DARPA. Um, Eventually, a lot of this stuff starts trickling down to us in the form of, well, Tang. Tang was designed for astronauts. We can buy it in the stores today. That also helped people to feel like they were futuristic. We're drinking Tang. It's got all these vitamins and minerals in it. Each of these types of people lives in different areas. They tell you what kind of stuff that they have in their bags specifically for that area. One thing they don't really cover is people who are disabled. I'm supposing if I go through enough of the homeless ones, I'll probably learn what you do in that situation. You get to learn the human side of it. That's the part that so many people miss out. They're like, the letter of the law, the letter of the law. Well, the letter of the law is not the letter of the law. Um, if you don't have the ability to get away, if you don't have the physical ability to run away from your attackers, you don't have the uh, physical ability to carry your pack, you don't have the physical ability to do any of the things that you need to do for yourself on a daily basis now, you're still making an effort. You're able to barely make it, but you're tearing your body down fast in the process. Having an exoskeleton would be a wonderful thing. I kind of understand Wraith's idea with having it be all electronic with all the batteries and everything. But there's, and I'm sorry I'm winking. I've been without sleep for a bit. My Tourette's is acting up. I don't think that's something I should have to apologize for, but I also don't want to give you guys the wrong impression. When people get the wrong impression and you don't share stuff like that with them, something that's as innocent as winking can turn into people beating you up because they think that you're hitting on them and you're gay, or they think you're hitting on their girlfriend, things like that. Um, there's a lot of things that Hollywood nerds came up with that are totally useful and valid. That thing that was in the 1980s in that movie, I remember that the actor in it was Australian, and I don't remember much about it beyond that. Um, when I saw that, I remember I really wanted to do animatronics. I started getting into everything animatronics that I could, and that's kind of an autistic thing. We see something we like and we learn how to do it ourselves. Problem is, we never have a place to do it ourselves. We're not afforded the same rights, chances, or opportunities as you. You tell us that we do, then you show us differently. Um, when I started getting into animatronics, some of y'all might remember those gripper hands or the gripper shark things. You know, they had those for a while where it's a little plastic tube about this long with a cheap string going through the middle. And it's got a little squeezy thing on this end. And on this end, it's like a shark's head or a dolphin or something. And it's got its mouth open. And when you squeeze the thing, it closes. Kind of like the trash grabbers. If you guys saw that situation with the Boulder police harassing that guy over having a grabber for picking up garbage, his name is Adak. It's basically one of those, but it's for kids. It's got a shark head on the end of it. If you want to pick up the house and get your kids totally into it, you can get toys like that and make it fun. You know? All right, it's time to go eat all the garbage. Um, but they also had a grabby hand that, it was one of them was a skeleton hand and one of them was the Terminator hand, and it's got these four things, one for each finger, and you stick your fingers in there and your thumb in there, and it's attached to the plastic things that go up to the plastic fingers that are each articulated with joints. And you squeeze it with your hand here, and it mimics the same thing on the piece of plastic. They had them in toy stores all over in the late 80s, early 90s. Um, but I got into that. I learned a lot about Steven Spielberg. I learned a lot about Lucasfilms. I was totally into all of that. When we started learning about stuff like the movie Alien, when you start learning about, they've got a bunch of different sections, and they've got a bunch of, in between each of those sections, they've got a little tiny servo, each and every one of them. And when you figure there's 100 segments, and they've got it so that those will, turn it both up and down and left and right on each and every single segment. And then there's, say, 100 segments, and there's four of those, you know, interconnecting each of them. I mean, you're talking about 96 of them, I believe, because you also have the four servos that are attached to the main body of the thing, and then the green screen. And, you start looking at it, and there's wires everywhere. When you see it with the green screen, it's not on Hollywood. You're learning about the production stuff, and you're like, man, that is really cool. Look at the thickness of that wire. There's a big old black cord, and it's like this big around, and then there's a whole bunch more of them all coming out around it, and you've got the hydraulic machine. You've got the dude on the computer who has been working on getting this tail sequence to work out just perfectly for one of the Alien movies. And it's just really cool to get into. But another thing is, when you're talking about pneumatics and you're talking about something that you're going to have on your feet, and when you're stepping down, you are literally stepping down with all of your weight, then you're coming up with 120 pounds worth of uh, potential mechanical energy. And that mechanical energy can be turned to electrical energy. It can also be used for pneumatic energy. If you make it so that you've got ports and valves that open based on where your body moves, similar to when we were talking about having the nylon that was attached to different parts, and as you moved and moved more tension on it, it would send an electronic signal through all of that electronic voodoo crap. It's directly opening and closing a port, directly opening and closing it right there as you need it when you're doing it. If there's a problem with batteries, you're not having that problem because they're not your batteries. If you've got a problem with the air intake system or the circulatory system, this is all stuff that can go through the exoskeleton itself. You don't have to have a lot of pressure in a system like that. And you can also use a system of fulcrums in the major contact points. That's where your load bearing would be. And you put the load bearing contact points each segment so that they land on a portion, like let's say where your ankle would be or your knee would be. Which you've got, instead of having a whole bunch of nuts and bolts that have to hold this whole thing together. You're basically building a knuckle, just like in your body segments. What that knuckle is meant to do is you start off with your foot. You've got the basic shoe thing that fits around your foot. That's going to be where all of the pressure is going to go. Um, so you have to build it up to an ankle portion and build it strong on each side where the ankles are, and build it when the weight is coming down on it. It is just touching a tiny portion of that ankle. It's just touching a tiny portion of a curved piece on each side. And there'll be just a little bit of difference because you want to have it so that if you have to have an extreme movement, that'll move to the safest extent that your body will allow and no further. Because you don't want to have something that's gonna get you injured, or something that the extra weight of it is gonna get you injured. You want it to be as simple as possible. Now, if you make it so that you imagine each piece is going to have a curved piece like this, like, we'll imagine everything above my hand here is a solid piece. And then this is a curve. And then this right here is a solid piece. And that curve, let's say there's where the rounded part is, it sits on there and it can rock back and forth on it. But it's pushing that weight or distributing the weight straight down. This would be where the ankle section is. This would be where the foot is. And then this next section up would be the section for supporting up to your hip. At that point, that would be where you would have a harness portion where you would actually have that strapped to you around your waist. Also, you would probably have it. The reason for having it attached around your waist is partially because you do want to be partially suspended. If you're going to be applying your weight to a base plate, you're going to be raising yourself up a few inches. And Wraith is pretty short. He always wanted to be tall anyway, or a little taller than he is. Now, if you've got this much area that you are stepping down on, um, instead of it being a rubber sole, it's just an air cushion. And every time you step down on it, you're building pressure. Um, and you're doing that on both sides alternating. Your suit is reacting to how you want to move. It's using the weight of the air that you're pushing through it just by stepping down to help propel you forward. And with each joint going all the way up your body, each one of them is just like the very first one at the ankle. It's just kind of rocking there. This is where your stability is. It's going to go in line. When you get to the waist harness, you do have to do stuff a little bit different, but you're not designing it a full spinal column like you would, a lot of those ones like the Terminator itself. You're just having more of a what would a bug have. He's got an exoskeleton. If you use lightweight materials, you can use polyethylene terephthalate, which is a really super lightweight plastic. And at each of those knuckle joint areas, you can use a piece of hardened steel, and you can use those both top and bottom. Another thing you can do is, since it is hardened steel, you can magnetize it, and you can make it so that each of those joints and intersections will attach to each other magnetically. It'll be easier to take off that way. It'll be easier to put on that way. You're also relying on your weight at that point to hold it together as well. So as long as you're making it so that you're using a wider fulcrum system, then you can use less air and less air pressure to get more movement done. Because mind you, you want to be able to use this even though it's on a rocker. You want to be able to have a system of control where it's actually assisting you in moving forward, not just helping to take care of the load bearing, which is at that point when we're talking everything that I've told you about just up to the waist. We're basically just turning your body weight and your forward momentum and forward movement to, and also your downward movement. This is gravity that we're using in order to maintain it so that you're not having to put all that weight there. What that allows you to do is, if you have something for your upper body that rests just against the waistline of the bottom portion of the system, it doesn't have to have any sort of movement, any sort of assistance whatsoever from the air pressure that you're using when you're walking. That upper portion can basically just be something that sits on the waistline. It's sitting, it's not applying any weight to your body whatsoever. It's just sitting on the waistline, and the waistline is, of course, sitting on basically its own skeletal system all the way to the ground. Now, there would be benefits to having it attached directly to you, especially if you want to really boost the system and make yourself weigh more. But in that particular scenario, you would not need the exoskeleton for the same reason as Wraith. You wouldn't need it for the same reason as I will potentially need in just a few years. You won't need it in the same way as Lana Ingelein would need it. You wouldn't. There's a lot of people who have crooked spines, or they have MS, or they have muscular atrophy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can happen where stuff like this that starts off with Hollywood, and before long we have the ability to have it ourselves. Now that movie in the 80s, the guy was in his suit, and then the clown was on the other side of the room, and he was controlling the clown. And the idea for Wraith was basically take that thing and instead of doing it from the other side of the room, just wear the clown costume and attach that to the clown costume. The other thing is if you just made clothing that you could wear that would have sensors on it, because Wraith is really into the electronic part of it. He spent a lot of years learning how to make each servo move just the perfect amount or whatever. The problem is that every single step that you make is going to be a little bit different. When you're stepping on terrain that's going up just a little bit of an angle, you're going to step a little bit different. So you do really need it to be something that's based off of your movement. When I get into this stuff, I get really into it, and then I want hands-on experience. I buy tools because I crave hands-on experience. When I learn about a different way that a life can be saved and I start running ideas through my head, there's a lot of stuff where I go, well, that's not really feasible for me. If it is feasible for me, I totally jump on it. I'm like, I got to get those tools and I have to get a place to build. Because of a few emergency situations due to, well, you guys have been following the story. There was a guy that I know and his ex got in trouble for drinking, and it affected me quite a bit. Um, as well as my living position and the safety of my stuff at the time. Things have calmed down a little bit, but I did have to move my stuff, and I had to basically stuff everything that I had into a horse trailer that I was outfitting for building things. This video, I'd planned for it to be about 5 minutes long, but the thing that made me think of that is there was a Japanese invention where they have a conveyor belt, and when the conveyor belt gets to a certain point, it pushes the item on it onto a scale. As it pushes down the scale, uh, it runs some gears that push it over to where it gets boxed or whatever. And then when it gets to the other end, there's a thing that touches it and it tilts up a little bit. That thing slides off, and then it's got a spring in it that spring returns it back to where it originally was. And it's the weight of the item that brings it forward. And then it's the tension of the spring being pushed down, or that was pushed down by the weight of the item. It's that spring trying to unspring itself that brings it back to its. And if you can use weight that way, then you can use the weight, number one, to push the spring down to go forward. But then you can use that very same spring instead of making you go backwards. It's just a simple mechanical valve, simple as all heck, for it to be basically a power assist. And the heavier you are, the more powerful the assist. The difficult thing would just be how bulky and big you would look. But in the case of wanting to go up in the mountains and wanting to explore, and basically you're stuck in your cabin, and everywhere that you go, like with Wraith, he was getting to the point last time that I talked to him, he couldn't drive. He, even if he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to. But something like that would allow him to go back out in nature the way that he wants to. It would allow him to not have to be plugged into a wall or plugged into a machine with a bunch of big, huge batteries. He could keep the weight down. He could keep the size down. If he wanted to go camping for a whole week, he could do it for a whole week without having to bring a whole bunch of extra battery packs and a bunch of solar panels and have them all strapped to his backpack and his vehicle and every panel of his vehicle, and then have some strapped on top of his tent to power the damn thing. Pneumatics and a lot of the different types of check valves that we have are more than sufficient, way more than sufficient. Anyway, I'm gonna again try to get some sleep. Wish me luck. If any of you guys have the ability to take some of those ideas, I mean, if you look at my Facebook and probably my MySpace before that, I haven't seen my MySpace in probably a decade. I talk about a glove mouse. How, when I was telling my dad about the glove mouse, how that was back during the 90s. And I was like, you could just get a mouse and have it so that it has a radio and it tells you where the different stuff is. And eventually people came out with stuff that was similar, some of it based on light, some of it actually based on radio. I didn't have the technological skills at the time. I mean, I was just a kid, but I had the imagination for it, and technology did catch up. Matter of fact, it turns out the technology we had at the time was enough that in the 1980s and 1990s we were already caught up. It was just a matter of putting the pieces together, like Legos. Somebody came up with Legos already. That building block is already there. If you want to build something with Legos, it's just a matter of putting the pieces together. We're also seeing where a lot of stuff that used to be incredibly expensive, it's not so expensive anymore. If we make a suit like that out of recycled materials and we can make a mold of it for, specific sizes, we can tailor it to, specific people's needs. Part of that is by the knuckle that's on it. You should be able to adjust the spindle just a little bit between each one to adjust a common size to the minute adjustments that you might particularly need. I know a lot of people who are offset by having a prosthetic. A lot of times they end up putting more inserts or less inserts into the shoe that they put on, depending on how worn the shoe gets, and also uh, depending on how much their body changes. Because although their body may change a lot, that titanium isn't going to change at the same rate. It's going to expand and contract based on the heat. You're going to expand and contract based on what you eat, how much you exercise, the train that you're in, So sometimes it ends up lopsided and it ends up giving them back problems or hip problems if it's just off by, even an eighth of an inch. So that's something where you would be able to, just like a prosthetic, you'd be able to go in and you'd be able to get it measured. Um, and you would get it basically customized to fit you. You could also adjust it yourself. I mean, on something like that, you could take a one size fits all kind of thing. If you wanted to make it as a kit, trim it off till it's at the size that you fit, then throw in some super glue and put in the magnets that are going to hold it together. Because once you've got them so that the two sides are being held together, let's say we're talking about something for your leg, right? We'll say this part. You've got it so that you've got one piece that attaches here and one piece that attaches here. They have a seam down the middle where the um, uh, magnets are, where the pieces go together. And when you put the next piece on top, where the joint is, like on your hips, you would have basically a piece on either side, and that would be where the hip piece would connect, and the hip piece would basically swivel back and forth on that. And I'm trying to remember what my point was in going through all that explanation. Just goes to show I'm a little too tired. But the other thing that I was going to say is that because it's pneumatic, you do have the potential to store energy in it. Um, Basically, what you're doing is you're making an air pump. You're making a bike pump. And if you have an air tank, they're like the air tanks that are in some of those airsoft wars that they have, or the paintball wars that they have. Those will hold up to like 3,200 pounds of pressure. And on something like that, you can give yourself an additional power assist or power boost. Oh yes, I remember what I was saying. When you put the next piece on it, what it's meant to do, especially on the sections that are between your ankles and your knee, um, that section especially, it's got an attachment at the top and the bottom. If you put the next piece on top so that it slightly overlaps it, and you have it slightly flare out so that it grabs easily or it'll slip over easily, then you can use the next piece in line to help to keep the piece below it in place. And that way, on a piece where you would have to have some sort of a strap on it to hold it, better, like the top of the leg, because you're going to have a different uh, pivot on the external on the hip than you're going to have on the internal, because the ball socket is up here, but you have flesh and hips that go down 6 inches lower than that, or a few inches lower than that anyway, that you can't just move all of your you can't just move your bones and your muscles and everything that's down there to fit something like that so that it'll fit in line with your hip. So on the inside, you're not able to actually fully assemble it or attach it that way. It pretty well has to be on the outside. But uh, because of that, having a strap up here on the top, and also the fact that you'd probably have to have a strap on your shoes, um, that would be able to basically hold everything together. Now, on the shoes, you wouldn't even need a strap because you've got the sole of the shoe, and then you've got each side of it, because remember, there's two halves to it. Once you've folded the two halves up and that magnet is there, basically the piece just above it, the way that it sits on it, and the way that it would pivot, um, then it would allow you to have a minimal amount of straps. Now, you also have the fact that you want to be able to spin left and right. Now, in that case, I wouldn't make that pneumatically powered. It, for the most part, wouldn't need to be. If it did need to be, it would likely be in people who have lower back injuries and up, where they would need that assistance mechanically for the upper half of their body. Um, and I've also studied a lot of the muscles and the structure of the face and the skeletal system. I studied all that stuff before I became an artist, just because I was interested in art. I was always told that I probably would never be an artist. My mom once, I told her that I wanted to be an artist. And this is a funny story. This is how I became an artist. I told my mom that I wanted to take Mr. Nordike's art class here in Chapel, um, that I wanted to be an artist. And she said, Sean, Eric's the artist of the family. but you might be an okay interior decorator. It's funny, a lot of the stuff that my mom said to me growing up was basically seemed like she was trying to lead me to be gay, or what she assumed would make a person gay. And then she wanted to proceed to tell me that she thought I was gay and that she wouldn't love me if I was gay. I've been trying to get along with my mother ever since, and I always have to do the intelligent thing and walk away. A lot of the stuff that was in Hollywood that cost millions and millions of dollars doesn't cost that anymore. If we can build just one or two pneumatic suits, that would be enough to cover for a production line. The reason for that is because if you're doing stuff that's molded, then if you can build one, you can build 100. If you can build one, you can build 1,000. If you build one, you can build 1,000,000. The mold is just as valid on day one as it is when you make the very last unit. That also helps us to get a lot of recycled materials that would either be melted down over and over and over again, or just sit there, go out into the ocean. This allows that to be melted down for one final process because you're not using a one time plastic bottle and then throwing it away. This is something that you're going to wear every day. This is something that Wraith would, he might never come back down out of the mountain. The biggest issue that he has, though, is he loses a lot of weight because he has problems keeping food down. And that also comes from complications from medications from his MS. They're supposed to help him out, but they just all make him sick. That's something that a suit like this isn't going to fix. Um, I guess good night again. Wishing you luck.